Hello. Hopefully all my things work, but thank you so much for having me. Let me just do a quick test here. Can you all see that? Does that come up for you? I can't tell. You have to say something. Oh, good. Okay, great. Cool. Then I will just technology. There we go. Okay, so expectations are set high. A son will be born, a Nazarite from beginning to end, birth to death, womb to tomb, and he will begin to save Israel from the hands of their oppressors. We are told that the boy grew, the Lord blessed, and the Spirit was upon him. What a great way to start off the story. For many, the vengeance and violence of the Samson narrative appear to be sanctioned by the Lord. Though the story ends in a funeral, the tragedy has been transformed into a victory for Israel and her God. The operative theology behind such a reading is that despite the blood and the blunders, God is ready to use sinners to accomplish his divine will. Though the bar may be lowered for future sinners like you and I, these high expectations for Samson set by chapter 13 are quickly challenged as Samson sees a Philistine woman in Timnah and asks his parents to arrange a marriage. Good Israelites as they were, they pleaded with him to choose someone from among his own people. Running counter to the Deuteronomic prohibitions against intermarriage, the narrator intrudes into the story to provide the reader with this divine perspective. Va'ivav va'imo, so his father and mother, lo yadu, did not know, ki me Adonai, he, that it was from the Lord, ki to'ona hu mabakesh, for he was seeking a opportunity, mipilishtim, from the Philistines. Uva'et hahi, and at that time, the Philistines, moshalim be'Israel, were ruling over Israel. Samson's desire for foreign women, a reoccurring snare for Israel, is explained here as part of the plot and part of the Lord's plan. Many commentators note that the importance of the narrator's comment, saying things like, quote, "This is the key to this episode and indeed the entire Samson account, for it provides a theological explanation of Samson's escapades." End quote. There's much discussion around the issues of divine sovereignty and human agency, as well as how exactly the Lord's plan fits with what has been said elsewhere about foreign women. But these comments rarely factor into the interpretation of the narrative as a whole. Reading such commentaries, looking at English translations, or even looking at the BHQ, one could easily miss the philological and syntactical difficulties of this verse. What these translations and commentaries assume in interpreting Judges 14:4 is that what the Lord seeks is something that the Philistines would regard as negative. Judgment or vengeance becomes the underlying goal that animates God's willingness to work through a sinner like Samson. My goal tonight is to provide a different reading, which shifts the motive of the Lord and complicates the traditional understanding of Judges 14:4. I will argue that it is the Timnite woman that is from the Lord, and what the Lord seeks from the Philistines is something that will be for their ultimate good, namely that through this woman, the Lord would bring redemption. So where to begin? Well, there are three things that complicate this verse. First, the object that is from the Lord, he, is represented as a third feminine singular pronoun. As Hebrew does not have a neuter case, the pronoun could be an it, meaning Samson's desire and or situation. As the statement follows immediately from ki hi yashra be'ana, a case could be made for Samson's desire. This would, however, be an abstraction of yashra be'ana that ignores the object of Samson's desire. The pronoun could still be neuter while referring to the entire situation of verses 1 through 3, though this would equally be an abstraction. And as you can see, options A and B are the most common way of translating it. The pronoun could also be a she, meaning the Timnite woman. This is the clearest reference, for in verses 1 through 3, Isha is used 5 times and is qualified by benot 3 times. The problem here, in scare quotes, is resoundingly feminine. Why should the pronoun refer to something different than the Timnite woman that has been the object of conversation? It seems likely that the reader is meant to understand that this Timnite woman is from the Lord. The second ambiguity is the identity of the seeker, rendered as a masculine pronoun. Is it the Lord or Samson? Both are plausible from the grammar, but it is more likely that the Lord is the one seeking, based on the context of the narrator's intrusion. A third difficulty is that the object which the Lord seeks from the Philistines, to'onah, is a hapax legomenon. It is usually read as pretext, occasion, or opportunity. Most translations struggle to connect this word with mipilashtim. Some translations add an infinitive, so the NRSV has a pretext to act, or the NIV, an occasion to confront. Typically, the preposition min is translated as against in these versions, which is an unlikely meaning for the preposition. BDB reads ground of quarrel, which would fit well with mipilashtim, right? So he was seeking a ground of quarrel from the Philistines. The verbal root is apparently anah 3, which means to be opportune, meet, encounter opportunely. It is rare, occurring only 4 times. Out of these verses, only 2 Kings 5:7 provides a helpful analog. The king of Aram sends his servant Naaman to the king of Israel to be healed of his leprosy. The king of Israel responds, he knows I can't heal him. Just look and see how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me. Ki mithane hu li. The crucial difference here is the lamed preposition instead of the min. In the context of 2 Kings 5, the hitpael of anah 3 is idiomatic. A more literal rendering would be, for he is causing himself to meet me. Or in today's parlance, right, he is trying to get up all in my face. This idiomatic phrase is clear from the context, but one should be careful not to overstate the connection between the rare idiomatic usage of a verb and a hapax legomenon noun derived from apparently the same root. Unfortunately, I'll have to skip this section, but what is apparent from the ancient versions is the difficulty of this clause. Though there are differences, the unifying feature in these translations, and including the modern English ones, is that they all view this to'onah as engendering negative consequences for the Philistines. Perhaps the meaning of to'onah can be illumined by looking at nipakesh, the main verb of clause B. Is it normal for the Lord to bekesh? And if so, what does he typically seek? Of the 225 times that bekesh is used in the Hebrew Bible, only 11 of them have the God of Israel as their subject. I shall go through them very briefly and categorize them according to their objects. The first category is bekesh plus an infinitive construct, and it's pretty clear. God is seeking to kill or destroy. A second category has bekesh plus miyad. Now, there are 3 identical constructions in Ezekiel 3:18, 20, 33:8. V'demo miyadeka avikesh. But I will require the blood from their hands. The Lord is explaining the prophetic commitment. What he says must be communicated. If the prophet fails to proclaim what the Lord says and these people die in their iniquity, the prophet will bear the responsibility. The Lord will require the blood from their hand. An analogous logic is perhaps at play in Genesis 9:5-6, which expresses a similar requirement of blood from the hands that take life. This command has provided the legal basis for retributive justice, but it also provides a cultic logic. The spilled lifeblood needs a corresponding spilling of lifeblood. It is this blood equilibrium that needs to be rectified, whether it's by the one who spilled it, i.e. the murderer, or by a substitute. Refocusing on the passages in Ezekiel, we can see that the blood required by the Lord is symbolic of justice. The blood is on the hands of the prophet who does not declare the words of the Lord. The wicked will die in their sins, but God's judgment will fall on the prophet. Thus, this phrase means that the object the Lord will seek is related to justice. And a third category is bekesh with no object. It is likely an idiom related to the second category that has to do with judgment resulting in punishment or destruction. A final category is bekesh plus an object. Focusing on Ezekiel 22:30, the Lord seeks someone to stand in the breach, to turn away his wrath. Here, the author has included much more detail concerning the object of the Lord's seeking. First, it is a person rather than a thing. Secondly, the text describes the actions of the person. They will, 1, repair the wall, 2, stand in the breach before the Lord, and 3, they will do so on behalf of the land being Israel. Thirdly, the author explains the effect of their actions. They will avert the wrath of the Lord. And finally, the author describes the location of where the Lord will seek, Mehem, which refers back to the people of the land in verse 29. Justice here is the fundamental issue. This person would rectify a broken situation, namely the corruption of the priesthood and the oppression of the poor. To summarize, by looking at the various objects and constructions of Bakesh, we can readily see a recurring and unifying theme. The God of Israel seeks justice, which is accomplished in 2 ways, judgment and reconciliation, which is probably better thought of 2 sides of the same coin. In the first construction, Bakesh plus an infinitive construct, it is clear that justice will come through the Lord's judgment. The second construction, Bakesh plus miyad, is idiomatic. In 3 of the 4 cases, blood was the object being sought. This represented God's justice, both judgment against the wrongdoer and reconciliation, in that the blood equilibrium was symbolically restored. In the third construction, Bakesh without an object, it was argued that the phrase was idiomatic of construction 2. The Lord would seek judgment. The fourth construction, Bakesh plus an object, was quite different. It was not idiomatic, and it did not convey vengeance, punishment, or judgment. Instead, the object was a person. This person would either be an agent or a recipient of reconciliation. As an agent, like David in 1 Samuel 13, the prophet priests in Ezekiel 22, or the godly offspring in Malachi 2, they would effect justice where there was injustice. The Lord's justice would be established through the faithfulness of his people. As a recipient, like the exiled and lost sheep of Israel, they would be the beneficiary of the Lord's actions in establishing justice and peace. From the available data, which category does Judges 14:4 belong to? It seems that construction 4 is the best option as the clause contains an object. Thus, it is unlikely that the phrase suggests that the Lord is seeking judgment. It is similar to Ezekiel 22:30 as it describes the location from the Philistines. Dissimilar to the other objects, or the other examples, the object does not seem to be a person. If the objects of the other examples were either the agents or the recipients of the Lord's reconciliatory justice, what does this mean for the To'onah in Judges 14:4? In this verse, the narrator has taken the reader behind the scenes. The perspective has shifted, and in effect, the audience can look not only behind the curtain, but into the very mind of God. Yet the difficulty is in the interpreting. Difficulties such as the hapax legomenon, its apparent rare root, the difficulty in fitting the verb and the noun and with the preposition, and the rare use of Israel's God being the subject of the verb bakesh should, at the very least, give the reader some pause. These difficulties, however, may allow the text to be read from other perspectives. One such reading may be that the To'onah that the Lord was seeking from the Philistines refers indirectly to a person. The feminine form may indicate that it is connected to the feminine pronoun in the clause before. The To'onah may refer to the Timnite woman, or at least an opportunity wherein she plays a pivotal role. She may be the agent or the recipient of reconciliation. There is, however, an apparent discrepancy between Judges 14 and other Deuteronomic prohibitions against marrying foreign women. The narrative intrusion perhaps reveals an ancient discomfort with Samson's choice. Marriage to foreign women, however, is not always condemned in Israel's scriptures. Moses, for instance, takes a wife from Cush. Rahab and Ruth are both foreigners who are incorporated into the people of Israel through their allegiance and worship to the Lord. The narrator's statement provides a counter-interpretation to the Deuteronomic perspective of Samson's parents, which reassures the reader that the woman is from the Lord. As it is also unlikely that the To'onah indicates judgment against the Philistines, perhaps then this Timnite woman will be an agent of God's salvation. Through her marriage to Samson, she may provide liberation for Israel, or even better, her whole people may encounter the God of Israel. Through this brief interjection and shift in perspective, the narrator has created certain expectations for the reader, namely that this foreign woman and Samson's marriage to her may become the epicenter for God's salvation. The beginning of the Samson narrative shares some resemblance to the strange story of Judah and Tamar in Genesis 38. While most commentators make no connection, literary or otherwise, there is some precedence for it in the Talmud. These resonances invite the reader to compare the two seemingly disparate stories without making any comment as to intentionality or textual priority. And I apologize for the very pedantic slide here. The obvious link is that both narratives take place around Timnah. It is unlikely they represent the same town geographically or historically. Nonetheless, the name may be imaginatively suggestive in the reading of the Samson story. Other connections include the threat and danger of fire and the role of foreign women. Now, the key resonance between the two narratives is the theme of seeing. Just as Samson goes to Timnah and sees the woman who is right in his eyes, Judah is on his way to Timnah and he sees Tamar, who he mistakes to be a prostitute, sitting in the entrance to Enaim. Now, this place name is from Ain, meaning eye or spring, suggesting a settlement near a well. If so, it would signal what Robert Alter calls a betrothal type scene, or at least a variation of it that is common in the patriarchal narratives. Right before Tamar is about to be executed, she reveals the equivalent of Judah's underwear. Now, this is not blackmail, but a calculated risk. She has not given Judah an ultimatum, but given him a choice to recognize the objects. In another sense, Tamar has given him an opportunity to see her. Reading canonically, these literary features, the location of Timnah, the threat and reality of fiery death, and the protagonist's actions of seeing and desiring a foreign woman, strengthen the possible literary and theological connection between Genesis 38 and Judges 14. What do these connections point to? In Genesis 38, Judah moves from a deceptive and unjust father-in-law to a man who is deceived and administers justice. Judah sees Tamar and he proclaims, "She is more in the right than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah." This interruption in the narrative presents the question, what is justice? The surprising answer is not found in the patriarchal and societal norms, but in Judah's response. Even in her deceptive harlotry, Tamar is more righteous than Judah. It was in this way that Tamar solidified herself as part of Israel. Justice in the narrative is characterized by reconciliation, not punishment. Tamar's execution is stayed, but even more, she is brought into the people of Israel. From the perspective of later history, Tamar would become a matriarch of the royal line of David and even of Jesus Christ. This type scene has been subverted here in Genesis. The woman at the well is not the promised wife of Abrahamic descent, like in the case of Rebekah. Instead, she is a foreigner who would nonetheless be instrumental in the formational history of God's chosen people. Returning to Judges 14, one notices more clearly the type scene. Samson goes down to Timnah and sees a foreign woman. Though his parents object to the marriage, the reader is given the divine perspective. Foreign or not, this woman was from the Lord, and through her, the Philistine oppression would end. Reading the scene through the canonical lens of Genesis 38 brings into question the prohibition against marrying foreign women. The last time the scene was set in Timnah, it was a foreign woman named Tamar that was declared more righteous than a son of Israel. It was through her that Judah's line would continue. Through this perspective shift in Judges 14:4, the reader's expectations have changed. They should be hopeful for what God has planned to do through this Philistine woman. Reconciliation, rather than judgment, may be the means by which God plans to save Israel. So to conclude, I have attempted to problematize the standard translation of Judges 14:4 by pointing out its ambiguities and philological difficulties. On the basis of my analysis, it seems preferable, at least to me, to reinstate the woman of Timnah as the he that is from the Lord and view the To'onah, the object of the Lord is seeking from the Philistines, as something positive that will end in reconciliation. The events that follow in Judges 14 and 15 reveal that Samson did not live up to these high expectations set for the reader. The woman from Timnah is murdered by the Philistines as a direct result of Samson's violent actions. If the vision of the Lord's salvation included the reconciliation of both Israel and the Philistines, then Samson does not appear to save anyone. The story that began at a wedding ends in a funeral, and in one sense is a tragedy. In another sense, the ability of this narrative to offer a different vision of how one might treat those regarded as other or as enemy may be part of its enduring quality as Jewish and Christian scripture. Thank you.